Redfin, one of the largest brokerages in the country, just published its official forecast for 2026. And for most of America, it is surprisingly hopeful. Redfin is calling it the Great Housing Reset. Home prices nationally are expected to rise only about 1%, but for the first time since the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, wages are finally expected to grow faster than home prices. Affordability slowly is beginning to improve. Mortgage rates are drifting down toward the low 6% range. Redfin describes it as the beginning of a long, gentle recovery. Good news, more or less, for most of the country. Redfin even expects a stronger spring buying season, with home sales ticking up a few percent as some sidelined buyers finally step back in. The brokerage is careful to say it will be slow, that it could take about 5 years to fully normalize, but the direction nationally is finally upward. But tucked inside that hopeful report is one sharp, specific exception. One place Redfin went out of its way to single out and warn about, and it is not a struggling town nobody wants. It is one of the most desirable regions in America, coastal Florida. In its own forecast, Redfin says that while the rest of the country slowly heals, homes in coastal Florida will languish on the market, and that some people who need to sell may be forced to take a loss. Read that contradiction again, because it is genuinely strange. The nation is being told recovery. Florida is being told to brace. Everywhere else, prices tick up and affordability improves. In coastal Florida, homes sit, and some owners lose money. That is the warning, and today I'm going to explain exactly what Redfin said, why they said it, and which specific Florida markets are in the crosshairs. This is not my opinion, and it is not a rumor. It is the brokerage's own published forecast in its own words. So why Florida, and why now, at the exact moment the rest of the country is finally catching a break? Redfin points to two forces, and together, they are the entire villain of this story. The first is the carrying cost squeeze. And this is the part most people get wrong. It is not the price of the house that is breaking these markets. It is the cost of owning it after you buy. Florida's home insurance now averages well over $8,000 a year, roughly 3 times the national average, and along the coast, it can run far higher than that. Layer on the disaster risk, the hurricanes, the flooding, and the premium increases that follow every single storm, and you get a simple, brutal result. A buyer can afford the mortgage payment but cannot afford the true monthly cost of owning the home once insurance is added on top. So the demand quietly dries up, not because people stopped loving Florida, but because the math stopped working. And this carrying cost problem is uniquely severe in Florida. Nationally, Redfin already reported a record gap heading into this year, with roughly 37% more sellers than buyers across the country, the widest imbalance in its records. In coastal Florida, that national imbalance is amplified by an insurance bill that exists almost nowhere else at this scale. To put the national mood in perspective, the typical American home that sold at the start of this year spent about 64 days on the market before going under contract, the longest stretch in 6 years. Coastal Florida is simply moving slower than all of it, and for a reason no other region shares. The second force is stranger, more specific, and it is the one Redfin flagged directly in its report. The pandemic-era remote workers who flooded into coastal Florida during the boom are now being called back to their offices. Return to office policies are pulling them back toward the job hubs they came from, and as they leave, they are listing their Florida homes. Here is why that matters so much. They are not listing one at a time spread out over years. They are listing in the same window, in the same coastal markets, all at once. So picture what that does. Demand is already falling because of the carrying costs, and now, on top of that, a wave of new supply arrives from returning workers heading for the door. Falling demand and rising supply in the same places at the same moment. That is the exact recipe for a home that sits on the market for months and eventually sells for less than its owner paid. Now let us walk through the specific coastal markets Redfin's warning actually targets, moving from the merely soft to the single steepest correction of them all. We start with Miami because Miami is the market Redfin named first, and because it captures the strangeness of this whole story perfectly. On one hand, Miami is one of the coastal Florida markets where Redfin expects homes to languish, sitting far longer as buyers hesitate over the insurance and the cost of living. Redfin's own data already shows Miami as one of the most lopsided buyers markets in the entire country, with far more sellers than buyers competing for a shrinking pool of demand. And yet here is the paradox inside the paradox. Prices in South Florida are actually forecast to hold or even tick up slightly because inventory in the best neighborhoods stays tight and international money keeps arriving. So Miami is not a story of falling prices, it is a story of frozen ones. And here is what makes it so counterintuitive. Redfin's search data shows Florida metros, Miami among them, are still some of the most searched destinations in the country for people looking to relocate. The desire has not vanished. What changed is that those searchers keep hitting the same wall, the insurance quote and the true monthly cost, and quietly deciding to wait. The demand is real. It is just frozen at the doorstep. Homes that sit for months, sellers who cannot move without cutting, and a market that feels stuck in place while the rest of the country slowly thaws. For a seller in Miami, that is a strange and frustrating trap. Your home may still be worth what you paid on paper, but you cannot actually turn it into cash without either waiting far longer than you planned or cutting the price to move it. A frozen market is not a falling market, but for anyone who needs to sell on a timeline, it can feel just as costly. Next is Fort Lauderdale, just up the coast, and this is where Redfin's data gets genuinely stark. In its most recent reading, Redfin found that Fort Lauderdale had more than 100% more sellers than buyers. Let that sink in. There were more than twice as many people trying to sell as there were people trying to buy, one of the very widest gaps of any major metro in the entire nation. When sellers outnumber buyers that heavily, every listing is competing against a flood of others, and the only way to stand out is to cut the price or pile on concessions. Redfin has also repeatedly flagged Fort Lauderdale among the metros where sellers are most likely to be cutting their asking prices. This is the languishing Redfin warned about showing up in the numbers right now, not someday. And Fort Lauderdale carries an extra dose of the remote work factor Redfin flagged. A large share of the pandemic arrivals who filled these buildings were remote professionals, and as their companies pull them back to northern offices, they are among the first to list. That is the return to office wave arriving in one market, visible in the seller to buyer gap. If this is the kind of straight, data-backed breakdown you want more of before you make a Florida move, do me a favor and tap the like button because it genuinely helps push this in front of other buyers and sellers before they get blindsided by a market that just changed the rules. And the markets ahead are where this warning only grows sharper. Then comes West Palm Beach, and it tells almost the identical story. Redfin's data showed West Palm Beach with roughly 94% more sellers than buyers, another one of the most seller-heavy markets in the country. The Palm Beach coast rode the pandemic wave as hard as anywhere, and now it is feeling the reversal just as sharply. The same forces are all here: the crushing insurance costs, the disaster risk that spooks buyers, and the returning remote workers listing their homes. West Palm Beach is the pattern repeating market by market, straight up the southeast coast. Redfin has flagged it alongside Fort Lauderdale, among the metros where sellers are most frequently cutting their asking prices, which is exactly what you would expect when this many homes are competing for this few buyers. What makes the Palm Beach coast especially instructive is that it is not a poor market at all. It is wealthy, desirable, and beautiful, and it is still seeing homes pile up unsold. That is the whole point of Redfin's warning. This is not about undesirable places. It is about desirable places where the cost of ownership finally outran the demand. Now we cross the state to the Gulf Coast, to Cape Coral, and the tone of the warning shifts from languishing to genuinely correcting. Cape Coral was one of the hottest destinations of the entire pandemic boom, a place of endless canals and brand new construction, and it expanded faster than almost anywhere. That is exactly why the forecasts single it out for a steeper price correction than the southeast coast. Redfin's data shows just how far the mood has turned. In a recent quarter, 43% of Cape Coral buyers were searching to leave the area entirely, while barely 1% of buyers nationwide were searching to move in. When the people already there are looking for the exit and almost no one outside wants in, homes do not just languish, they lose value. Cape Coral is where Redfin's soft warning becomes a hard number. Redfin's data shows homes here taking far longer to sell than they did at the peak of the boom, with a rising share of listings cutting their price to find any buyer at all. And unlike the southeast coast, where tight inventory holds a floor, Cape Coral has the opposite problem. Years of rapid new construction left it with plenty of supply, so when demand fell, there was nothing to catch the price. That is why the same warning that means languishing in Miami means an actual price correction here on the Gulf. Just up the Gulf Coast is Northport, and it carries the same weight. Northport was only a few years ago one of the fastest growing cities in the entire country, built almost overnight on new construction for new arrivals. Now the arrivals have slowed to a trickle, and the forecasts put this southwest Florida region among the steepest corrections in the state. Redfin shows the typical Northport home now taking around 77 days to sell, and drifting lower in price as it waits. A town built entirely on the assumption of endless growth is uniquely exposed the moment that growth pauses, because there is nothing steadier underneath to hold it up. Redfin shows listings here piling up and price reductions becoming routine, the signature of a market where sellers badly outnumber buyers. Northport is the Gulf Coast version of the exact warning Redfin issued. And that brings us to the single steepest correction on the entire list, the flagship of Redfin's Florida warning, the Tampa and St. Petersburg area. If you have followed the pattern this far, you already understand it better than most buyers walking into an open house this weekend. So stay with me for the last one, because it is the steepest correction of them all, and it is happening in a place nobody expected. And that brings us to the single steepest correction on the entire list, the flagship of Redfin's Florida warning, the Tampa and St. Petersburg area. Of all the major Florida metros, the 2026 forecasts point to Tampa Bay for the deepest price decline, on the order of 3.5% down over the year, even as the nation as a whole is expected to rise about 1%. While the typical American market gains a little, Tampa Bay is projected to give back several times that in the opposite direction. Tampa is not some small speculative town, it is one of Florida's flagship metros, which is exactly what makes this so telling. Redfin has also named Tampa among the metros where sellers are most likely to be cutting their prices. Zillow's own data already shows the Tampa area down about 3.5% over the past year, which means this is not merely a forecast waiting to happen. It has already begun. Homes that would have sold in a weekend 2 years ago now sit for weeks, and the sellers who priced for yesterday's market are the ones quietly slashing today. Redfin has repeatedly placed Florida, alongside Texas, at the top of its national list for the share of sellers cutting prices, and Tampa Bay sits near the front of that line. When the state people spent 5 years rushing into becomes the state where sellers cut the hardest, you are watching a genuine turn, not a blip. The reasons are the same ones running through this entire story. Prices that raced far ahead of local incomes during the boom, then the insurance and carrying cost wall slamming down on top, and demand thinning out just as supply builds. When even Tampa is the steepest faller in the state, you know, this is not a fluke in a few tiny markets. It is coastal Florida top to bottom, from the southeast beaches to the Gulf. So that is the warning, market by market. Before I give you the honest truth that keeps all of this accurate, there is one resource worth knowing about if any of these coastal markets is on your radar. I keep everything in one place, a single breakdown of 40 Florida towns, 20 that are genuinely worth buying into right now, and 20 worth staying well away from, each with the specific reason attached, including the exact carrying cost and demand risks Redfin is warning about. If you want to see which side of that line a town falls on before you ever make an offer, the link is waiting in the description. But stay right here, because the honest truth about how far this warning actually goes is the single most important thing you will take away from this video, and it is very different from the doom you will hear everywhere else. Here is that honest truth, and it matters because your trust is worth more than a scary headline. Redfin's warning is real, but it is specific, and it is not what the fear channels will turn it into. This is not a statewide price drop, and it is absolutely not a repeat of 2008. Redfin's warning is that homes will languish, that they will sit longer, and that some sellers may be forced to take a loss. That is a warning about time and leverage, not about a sudden wipeout. In fact, in parts of South Florida, Redfin and other forecasters expect prices to hold steady or even rise slightly, precisely because tight inventory keeps a floor under them, even while sales slow and homes sit for months. The clearest sign of that split is in the sales numbers. Forecasters expect home sales across South Florida to fall by around 7% in 2026. One of the steepest sales declines projected anywhere in the country, even as prices there barely move. The market is not losing its value. It is losing its motion. Fewer deals, longer waits, and stuck sellers without the price wipeout the fear headlines keep promising. Single-family homes are holding up far better than condos, which carry the extra weight of association fees and assessments. And across most of the state, what is happening is a cooling and a normalizing, a return to a balanced market, not a market coming apart. So take the warning seriously, but take it accurately. There is even a genuinely hopeful thread inside all of this. Redfin's report notes that some Florida insurers are finally planning rate reductions, and recent reforms have drawn new carriers back into the state, which could slowly ease the exact carrying cost squeeze driving this whole story. It will not happen overnight, but the force behind the warning is not permanent. And here is what it actually means for you, depending on which side of the deal you are on. If you are a seller in coastal Florida, the message is simple and urgent. Price your home realistically from day one, because in a market this seller-heavy, the home that is overpriced, does not just sit. It becomes the stale listing that every buyer skips. And if you are a buyer, this is the most leverage you have had in these markets in years. Sellers are cutting, concessions are on the table, and time is on your side. The very warning that frightens sellers is an open door for the patient, informed buyer who understands exactly why these homes are sitting. Ask how long the home has been listed and whether the price has already been cut. Ask what the insurance actually costs before you fall in love, because that single number is the difference between a deal and a trap. And do not just take the seller's estimate. Get your own quote in writing on the specific property, because that figure can swing a monthly payment by hundreds of dollars. In a market Redfin has flagged as one where sellers may have to take a loss, the informed buyer is the one holding all the leverage, and the uninformed buyer is the one who overpays into a market everyone else already knows is soft. And that is the final strange twist inside Redfin's warning. The very same forecast that tells sellers to brace tells buyers to step forward. In a country that is slowly healing, coastal Florida is the one place where the leverage has flipped hardest toward the buyer. The warning is completely real. Whether it is bad news or good news depends entirely on which side of the closing table you are on. The strange thing about Redfin's warning is that for the right buyer, it is not a warning at all. It is an invitation. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you because the comments on these are always the sharpest part. Are you trying to buy or sell in one of these coastal Florida markets right now? And are you feeling what Redfin is describing? The homes that sit, the price cuts, the sellers who cannot move? Tell me your market and what you are seeing, because someone scrolling right now is about to make the same decision and needs to hear it. And if this helped you understand what Redfin actually said beyond the headline, hit the like button and subscribe. Because these forecasts shift every quarter, and I would rather you hear the next one from me than a misleading version somewhere else. Because that is exactly what is coming next. Redfin's report did not only name the markets going cold, it also named the ones about to heat up, the affordable places where the buyers and the workers are heading in 2026. So stay with this channel and we will break down where Redfin says the smart money is moving next, before the crowds ever arrive.